How do you want your story to end? Most people remember David for Goliath. Others remember him for Bathsheba. But the Bible ends David's story in an interesting way. His final recorded words aren't about war, but worship. They're about preparing the next generation. He organizes the worship of Israel, commissions Solomon, gives away great wealth for God's house. And in a beautiful prayer, he reminds us who truly owns everything. David organized the descendants of Aaron into 24 priestly divisions so that the temple ministry will continue in an orderly way long after he's gone. At first glance, it feels like another list of names. But there's something much deeper happening. God is showing that worship isn't built on chaos or personal preference, but on obedience. Every priest had an assigned role, and every family had a responsibility. No one could serve just however they please. Even before the temple came into existence, David was preparing for generations of faithful worship. Faithfulness often looks ordinary. Even though most of these priests are never mentioned again, God still chose to record every one of their names. But worship isn't just about priests. David's next step reveals something many Christians overlook about music itself. David started by organizing the musicians. They weren't entertainers, they were ministers leading God's people to worship him. The text in chapter 25 says they prophesied with their instruments, not meaning they received new revelation, but that they were proclaiming God's truth through worship. Then David organizes the gatekeepers and treasurers, because worship required protection, stewardship, and integrity. Someone had to guard what belonged to God. Others would manage the temple treasures. God valued the people who were working behind the scenes, the people who opened doors, the people who protected entrances, and the people who counted resources. All of it mattered. David now had organized worship, but who would lead the nation itself? Chapter 27 lays out Israel's military leaders, tribal officials, royal administrators, and those responsible for the king's farms, vineyards, livestock, and treasures. It's easy to skip over, but notice the pattern. God cares about organization. The kingdom would only flourish through faithful stewardship. David doesn't simply leave Solomon a throne, he gives him a structure. Good leaders don't just build something impressive, they leave behind systems that help others succeed after they're gone. Now David gathers the entire nation for one final speech. And it's one of the most moving moments in the entire Old Testament. David publicly announces that Solomon has been chosen by God to build the temple and explains why he himself was not permitted to build it. Then, he gives Solomon a powerful command to know the God of your father and serve him with a whole heart and a willing mind. David understood something every parent must remember. Faith cannot be inherited. Every generation must personally know the Lord. David also hands Solomon the temple plans, and just as God gave Moses the pattern for the tabernacle, David says these plans came by the Spirit. Then David tells Solomon to be strong and courageous, echoing the words Moses told Joshua centuries earlier. Every generation needs courage to continue God's work. But David's greatest sermon isn't spoken with words. It's spoken with generosity. David gives an astonishing amount of his own wealth for the temple. Then Israel's leaders respond with joyful generosity as well. This was because they understand that everything already belongs to God anyway. And David's prayer to round off the last chapter in 1 Chronicles cements that theme. He acknowledges that riches, honor, strength, and victory all come from God, and that they aren't giving God something he lacks, but returning what already belongs to him. After this, David dies, full of days, riches, and honor. Chronicles intentionally ends without revisiting David's darkest failures. Not because those sins weren't real, they are fully recorded in 2 Samuel, but because the chronicler wants readers to focus on something else: God's covenant faithfulness. Israel's hope was never in David's perfection, but in God alone. As 1 Chronicles comes to an end, one truth stands above everything else: God always has a perfect plan. And the same God who was faithful to David is still faithful today. David organized priests. Jesus became our great high priest. David appointed musicians to lead worship. Jesus gives his people a new song of redemption. David prepared a temple. Jesus became the true temple. David gathered treasures that could never fully remove sin. Jesus offered himself as the perfect and final sacrifice. David passed the kingdom to Solomon, but Solomon's kingdom eventually faded, and only one king reigns forever, Jesus Christ. The chronicler wrote these final chapters to remind Israel that God's promises had not failed. Centuries later, God fulfilled his promise exactly as he said he would. Jesus was born into David's family, and he established an everlasting kingdom. And one day he will return to reign forever.